In this video, I'm going to take what I've been doing with the Singer Model 20 SewHandy one step further with the binding of this placemat. I've pieced it with this machine, I quilted it with this machine, and now I will be binding it with this machine. And one thing that does concern me right from the beginning, this time what I've done, on the placemats I made with the Brother LX3014, I stitched the long sides of the binding first and then turned up the ends. On this one, what I've done is pressed, folded, and pinned all four edges. Now here's a corner, and what that does is put 4 layers of binding at the corner. And I also have pins, and I want to mention the way I've pinned this, I have all the pin heads facing in, and I think that is about the only way that I will be pinning things to use with this machine, because that leaves the least area of the pin on the back to scratch the bed of the machine. Now, if you had one of the earlier models from the 1920s or 30s, they're black with a slightly different frame, and they have a chrome cloth plate. So you might feel less worried about scratching that than you do with this, which is a painted cloth plate. And you know, I don't really know why they did it this way, except this is around 1953, and that was just before, say, the Singer 500As came out. But the 401s, I think, would have been made, and those were painted brown. I think the 301 was made then. So this Singer Brown was a color they were using on their full-size machines. And I did just buy another one of these, believe it or not. And on the second one, the box is different. It doesn't come with a case. And it does say on it that it is a toy machine. So what they were doing was trying to get you to buy one of these for your child at the same time probably that you bought your Model 301 or 401 or later on the 500. Those are 3 models I can think of right off the top of my head that have this Singer Brown. And so wouldn't it be nice to walk into a Singer store and buy a 401 and then, oh look, you can have one for your daughter. And some of the marketing does say for the girls, which, you know, at that time they left boys out of everything. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is bind with this one. And I bought a second one. I was going to look for an earlier model with the chrome cloth plate, perhaps not in very good cosmetic condition, so that I could feel fine about scratching it or using it. I ended up buying the exact same type that I have here at about half the price, because it doesn't come with a case, it'll be missing the clamp, it doesn't have any of the small attachments at all. It's basically just the machine and the original manual. And what I'm going to do is probably put this one back in the case and use the clamp from it until I find another clamp. Maybe use the seam guide and the cloth guide. Of course, needles I would have to buy for both of them anyway. The other one is not really beat up or in bad shape, but I want to be able to just freely use one of them and know that I'm not, well, I mean, I'd like to keep, some of my machines I like to keep as collectibles because they don't make them like this anymore. And when you have a good example of one, it really is tempting to keep it in the box and not use it. But at the same time, the reason I bought this was because Model 20s around this time period, this is 1953, my father served in the Korean War, which was 1952. When this machine, if it is accurate to 1953, my father was in Germany in 1953. And originally, chain stitch machines were made to use for military uniforms. This all ties in with Quilts for Veterans, and on my blog for Quilts for Veterans, I have machines. My earliest machine is 1872, and my most recent machine is a 2015-2016 Brother. And those machines represent all the years, all the sewing, all the veterans, all the wars. So the chain stitch machines fit into this because along with people making quilts or blankets or comfort items for veterans, veterans, when they were in the service, needed uniforms. And from what I can see in the history of the chain stitch machines, they were used for tailoring or uniforms, or even today they're used for apparel. So that's the aspect of how these chain stitch machines fit into my overall plan. And so I need one that I can just freely use because it's a part of what I'm doing. So I bought the same one from the same, around the same time period, maybe a little bit, it might be like 1954 or 55 because the box is different. The manual is different. So I'll find that out when it gets here. But I'm going to take that one and I'm just going to use it as if I had it in 1954, which actually is before I was born. So by the time I was, say, 8 or 9 or 10, we'd be in a totally different model, probably. But I'm sticking with my father's service in the war and the Korean War. So that's why I got this time period. That's why I bought a second one around this time period, and I want to be able to use one. So the reason that all of that ties in with binding is because as I move from hand piecing back to machine piecing, these machines, even though they were marketed for children, are so compact and you could take it anywhere. I could potentially make a quilt for a veteran anywhere I am. I may not be able to hand quilt the whole quilt, but I plan on hand quilting them anyway. And let me correct that. I may not be able to machine quilt the whole quilt, but I plan on hand quilting them anyway. So what I would need this for is the piecing and probably the binding at the end. And the rest of it I would be doing by hand anyway. So here I have 4 layers of binding, and I have pins in here, and I'm going to do it on this machine instead of waiting for the other one to get here. I've got the pins, like I said, facing with the heads in because it would be the heads that scratch the paint. I personally hate short pins that have plastic heads. I would imagine if I were using, say, inch and a half long pins with plastic heads, I wouldn't get as much scratching. But I'd rather just keep the pins away from the paint if I can. So now the machine has thread in it, and I think you can see it's a little bit tough to fit this under there, which doesn't mean that it's impossible, because I wasn't really shoving that under the Brother LX3014 either when I did this. And the presser foot is in the up position, and there is a pin there. So then, if I go this way, there's 2 pins here. You see how this you kind of have to manipulate things into place to do this. And I'm not sure if I want to do that long term. And the other thing is, when you're doing almost any kind of binding except a hand-sewn binding, you're going to have pins. So pins are a reality when you're doing a binding. if I were using the modern plastic clips that people use, I would have to obviously remove those clips as I got to the presser foot. So here I am starting about 1 inch from the corner because I'm not shoving that under there. But let's see if overall it goes through 3 layers of the actual placemat plus an additional 2 layers in a folded binding. So that's 5 layers to do the binding, and I'd like it to be straight and neat and without a problem. And I have the stitch length set at the longest stitch. And I'm going to loosen the tension just a bit. And it goes through that without a problem. It really is going through that without a problem. So potentially, maybe I can actually piece and then bind a quilt with this machine. Now I'm going to go slow when I get to a pen. This is working fine so far. And that just went over 2 pins. Now here I'm hitting a pin, and I don't want to do that. I mean, this would have been designed knowing that people were going to be using pins. And that's, I think, why I went and bought a second one, because I would like to be able to use it the way that it was originally made to be used. And you don't know whether most young girls would sew a lot or not sew very often, or there's no real average, I guess, on how much it would get used. So somebody must have expected that the cloth plates were going to get very scratched if these machines got used. Now here I'm coming to a corner, and even though I didn't want to start the corner under the presser foot, let's see how it handles the corner. I'm going to pull the pin out from the corner, because that's actually an additional 2 layers. It goes right through it. Goes right through it. So I have the needle down, and I'm turning the fabric. Now what I'm going to do, I went a little bit further than I wanted to, so I'm moving the fabric over. And this seems like it's sewing in a choppy fashion, but it isn't. That's really, I think, me trying not to go fast. I unthreaded it a few minutes ago, and it worked so smoothly and so fast. I have a very heavy wooden kitchen table, and it is shaking just a little bit from this action. And if you hear the noise, that's the handle on the case that's shaking a little bit. And here I'm at another corner. These are the things that, the 3 things that I've done videos for on this machine: the piecing, the quilting, and now the binding. The reason I didn't buy one for such a long time was because I was thinking, I have so many sewing machines that can do any of those things so easily, that I was thinking, you know, why would I actually need one of these if I can just do it with one of my full-size machines? But the portability of this, let's say that I wanted to go down to, we have in October an event called the Yarmouth Seaside Festival, and there are a lot of craft tables and crafters down there. There's a lot of food booths, there's parades. There's a 3-day event for the town. And let's say if I were going to a booth and I wanted to promote quilts for veterans or other people donating other things to veterans, and I just wanted to sit there and quilt, this is an ideal machine to bring. I do have my 1588 portable treadle, but it's an awful lot heavier than this one. And this, all I would need is a table. Now I'm getting a little bit of a jam up here as I go past the corner. So that's the corner fitting under the presser foot. So I bet when I look on the bottom of that, I'll have a few loops that aren't quite uniform. Yep. There are a few loops there that are not quite uniform. So I don't know if that was because of the feed dogs. I'll have to kind of pull that apart, see why it did it, and then I'll go over it again. Now the pins themselves are not hitting the paint. So the way I have it pinned, it shouldn't be a problem. I'll feel better about having a second machine that I'm not really worried about ruining the finish. And you know, the one thing that I've been thinking since I bought this, why the heck aren't they making these like this today? That's what I can't understand. If you go look for a young girl's Singer sewing machine, the only thing you can find is a plastic model, completely plastic. I mean, they look like they're all toys for, say, the 4, 5, and 6 age group. And I guess what they expect people at 9 or 10 or 11 to be using would be something similar to my brother. But even though that's a very simple machine to run, it's not like this. It's not demonstrating the reason that you're sewing, or the way the stitches are made, or what you can accomplish with a simple machine. In other words, today you either have plastic at a very young age, or a modern machine with a lot of things that you may not be ready to do yet. So I think they should be making these and these only. All brands. It's not just Singer. If you look for a child or a young girl starter machine, there really isn't one like this. There isn't one like the Gateway. Now the Gateway has rough edges, and just a few things could have been changed to meet today's safety standards, but the quality of the Gateway is better than the plastic that they're selling today. Now I'm almost back at the beginning. I've left most of the pins in after I've gone over them. And I just had that one little jam up at one corner. I'll leave that down. Pull out some extra thread. and I'm looking at the back of it. It's just that one corner that has a few loose loops. It's not as neat as I would like it to look. Now the other corners aren't really all that much better, so I'm not, see, there's one huge loop. So I'll either have to tack that down, and I'm not sure if that's something I need to get better at as I go around corners. This one doesn't look that bad. There's one double loop right there. But even this one I had stitched, I had gone too far and then came back. So, but that's all operator error, except for that one corner that stopped. So, given that the average quilt is going to have similar layers, this is using cotton batting. If I were using polyester puffy batting, which I used to use a lot in the past, then what I would do is just trim the batting probably further in on the placemat than I do with the cotton batting. With the cotton batting, I leave it right to the edge of the quilt sandwich, but with polyester thick batting, I would trim it further back. So there is a little placemat that has been completely made by the Singer Model 20, pieced, quilted, and the binding done, a fold-over binding. There's the back of the piece. Very nice, neat little chain stitches, except for the areas that I mentioned on the corners of the binding. And if I used my other method of doing the two long sides first and then doing the two short sides, I probably wouldn't even have that show up. So all in all, I think this is a great little machine. It has a place in my machine collection, even though I'm not really a machine collector. I use them all. But it has a place in the machines that I own.